How does a place ignored for more than a century become the richest and most powerful country on Earth? North America was not supposed to be the prize. At first, Europe looked past it. The gold, the spices, the crowded empires, the obvious wealth. All of that seemed to be somewhere else. Yet through war, luck, land deals, migration, slavery, rebellion, and raw ambition, the United States slowly turned from a thin strip of colonies into a continent-sized power. Before Columbus crossed the Atlantic, European maps did not show the Americas as a great continent waiting to be conquered. The Vikings had spoken of land far to the west, but almost no one understood what it really meant. Columbus thought he could reach Asia by sailing west. Instead, he reached islands in the Caribbean. He did not find the Asian spices he expected, but he still believed he was near India. That is why he called the people he met Indians. He collected goods returned to Spain and told the king and queen there was wealth across the sea. Spain listened very carefully. A few years earlier, Portugal had found a way to reach Asia by sailing around Africa. So Spain and Portugal made a deal to divide non-Christian lands between them. Portugal focused on routes to Asia and built a trading empire. Spain moved aggressively into the Americas. But the parts Spain wanted most were not in the north. The real prize seemed to be farther south, where there were large populations, gold, silver, and powerful native empires to conquer. Spain did send an expedition into North America in 1539, but it did not find the riches they wanted. So much of North America was treated like empty, useless space. England looked at North America early, but then waited. It sent explorers while Spain was still focused on the Caribbean. But almost a century passed before the English seriously tried to colonize it. Their first attempt was Roanoke, in what is now North Carolina, in 1585. Then England became caught up in war with Spain, and the colony disappeared under mysterious circumstances. So England tried again at Jamestown. This time, the colony survived. Then came Plymouth, where the Pilgrims arrived. They were strict Christians who banned things they saw as sinful, including gambling, and even celebrating Christmas. More settlers followed. Over time, the Atlantic coast filled with British colonies. While Britain grew along the coast, France was claiming the vast interior of North America. By 1754, the question could no longer be avoided: who would control the continent? New France had only about 60,000 people, so the French relied heavily on alliances with native tribes. The British colonies had more than 1 million people, and they also worked with native allies. This conflict became known in America as the French and Indian War. Britain won. But this war was not only fought in North America. It was part of a much larger struggle in Europe and across the world. When the fighting ended, the map changed dramatically. France gave part of Louisiana to Spain before the war ended, partly to keep it away from Britain. After the war, France surrendered the rest of Louisiana to Britain, and Canada also became British. Britain now controlled enormous lands in North America, but victory came with a huge bill. So Britain turned to its colonies. The logic in London was simple. Britain had spent money defending the colonies, so the colonies should help pay. But the colonists saw it very differently. They believed they had already done much of the fighting. Worse, Britain was taxing them without giving them representation in Parliament. The dispute over taxes became protests. Protests became violence. Violence became revolution. On July 4th, 1776, the Americans declared independence from Great Britain. But declaring independence and winning it were not the same thing. The war continued for 5 more years before the United States truly secured its freedom. Then came the next problem. The new country barely worked. The 13 former colonies had become 13 states that acted almost like separate nations. The central government was weak. The system was clumsy. The new republic was in danger of failing almost as soon as it had begun. So the Founding Fathers created a new constitution. It built a stronger federal government that could actually function. Once 9 states ratified it, the Constitution became official. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. But the country was still small compared to what it would become. It hugged the Atlantic coast. Much of the land to the west was still controlled by Spain or other powers. Then Napoleon changed everything. In France, Napoleon seized power and began building his empire in Europe. He also wanted a new French empire in North America. So he arranged for Spain to return Louisiana to France. This worried the United States. American farmers and merchants depended on the Mississippi River to move goods. If Napoleon controlled the river and New Orleans, he could choke American trade. So the United States asked to buy New Orleans. Napoleon had bigger problems. He needed money for war against Britain, and he worried that if America discovered his plans in North America, it might side with Britain. So instead of selling only New Orleans, he decided to sell the entire Louisiana territory. In 1803, the United States bought Louisiana for $15 million. The country doubled in size overnight. That was good timing, because the American population was exploding. In those days, the average family had many children, and the population was nearly doubling every 20 years. More people needed more land, and the West looked open to settlers. Of course, the land was not truly empty. Native peoples lived and hunted there. But American expansion pushed forward anyway. Settlers moved west, claiming land and forcing native communities aside. In 1819, the United States bought Florida from Spain. In that same agreement, America and Spain drew a border between the United States and New Spain. Only 2 years later, Mexico won independence from Spain, and the United States suddenly had a new neighbor. Northern Mexico was difficult for Mexico City to control. It was distant, lightly populated, and hard to defend. So the Mexican government invited Americans to settle in Texas. The plan backfired. American settlers soon outnumbered Mexicans in the region. Before long, Texas broke away and became its own independent republic. The Texans wanted to join the United States, but there was one major problem: slavery. Texas allowed slavery, and the United States was already deeply divided between free states and slave states. Adding Texas could upset the balance. For a while, America hesitated. Then, in 1845, the United States annexed Texas. That helped spark a war with Mexico. At the end of the war, the United States paid Mexico $15 million and took a huge stretch of land across the Southwest and West. 5 years later, America bought another strip from Mexico for $10 million. Meanwhile, the United States and Britain settled the Oregon dispute. Britain kept the land above the agreed line, and America took what lay below it. In about 50 years, through luck, purchases, diplomacy, migration, and one brutal war with Mexico, the United States had stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. There was nowhere obvious left to expand on the continent. So America looked outward. One strange law helped with that: the Guano Islands Act. Guano, basically bird droppings, was valuable as fertilizer. Under this law, Americans could claim unoccupied islands covered in guano for the United States. It sounds ridiculous, but the law still exists. Back in California, the timing of American expansion looked almost impossibly lucky. Soon after the United States acquired California, gold was discovered. People rushed west in huge numbers to dig for fortune. In Oregon, free farmland attracted more settlers. The country was growing fast, and for a moment, it seemed surrounded by opportunity. But inside the country was a crisis that could not be ignored: slavery. In the North, slavery was illegal, and many people saw it as a moral evil that had to end. In the South, slavery was central to the economy and society. Americans had argued over slavery for decades, but the conflict reached a breaking point in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Many Southern leaders believed Lincoln would move against slavery. So, most slave states broke away and formed their own country. The Civil War followed. It was massive, bloody, and devastating. The North won. Slavery was abolished. The United States was preserved. But the cost was enormous, and Lincoln himself was assassinated just as the war ended. Not long after, America gained another huge territory. Russia wanted to sell Alaska. American officials negotiated the purchase, and the United States bought it for $7 million. At the time, some people mocked the deal, but Alaska gave America an enormous northern territory rich in resources and strategic value. Now, the United States had land across the continent, and far to the north. But it still wanted influence in the Pacific. That brought attention to Hawaii. American businessmen had gained control there and wanted the United States to annex the islands. One president rejected the idea, believing America should not abuse its power by taking advantage of weaker nations. But others argued that if America did not take Hawaii, another major power, such as Germany or Japan, might do it first. Then, Hawaii could become a military threat in the Pacific. The question became bigger than Hawaii. Should the United States stay out of other nations' affairs, or should it act to protect its own interests? That question was tested in Cuba. Cuba was fighting for independence from Spain. Spain had already lost most of its American colonies after the American and French revolutions, but Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines remained under Spanish control. American newspapers covered the Cuban struggle constantly, and many Americans sympathized with the rebels. Then, in 1898, an American warship exploded and sank under mysterious circumstances. The United States demanded that Spain leave Cuba. Spain declared war. The Spanish-American War was short. The United States quickly captured Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. In doing so, America effectively ended what remained of the Spanish Empire that had begun with Columbus. During the same war, the United States annexed Hawaii. It was becoming too important as a naval base to ignore. Then, American politics shifted again. After President McKinley was assassinated, Theodore Roosevelt unexpectedly became president. Roosevelt believed in power, especially naval power. The United States wanted a canal through Central America, so its navy could move quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The first plan involved Colombia, which controlled Panama at the time. A deal was discussed, but Colombia refused to approve it. Then, Panama became independent with American support. Soon after, the United States got the right to build the canal there. Roosevelt also built up the Navy until it became one of the largest in the world. America was no longer just a growing nation. It was becoming a global power. In 1914, the Panama Canal was completed. American ships could now move between oceans faster than ever before. The United States had crossed the continent, reached into the Caribbean and Pacific, built a world-class navy, and gained the infrastructure to project power globally. That same year, World War I began. America's rise had been strange, uneven, and often ugly. It began with land Europe barely valued. It grew through colonization, revolution, expansion, war, slavery, industrial growth, and overseas ambition. What started as a chain of coastal colonies became a country stretching from sea to sea, then beyond the sea. By the time the world went to war in 1914, the United States was no longer a distant experiment on the edge of the map. It had become a power the world could not ignore. If you want more videos like this, subscribe. And if you want to learn more about American history, check the notes and clarifications in the description. See you next time.